morning, good afternoon, good evening, good luck sleeping. You're watching PNT's Hidden UFO History, our ongoing series where we dive deep into the archives of previously classified UFO reports submitted to and investigated by Projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book. These three projects were U.S. Air Force initiatives created to investigate the massive wave of UFO activity that inundated the world beginning in the 1940s. Project Sign was created first, eventually becoming Project Grudge, which finally became Project Blue Book. Ostensibly scientific in nature, the various projects' investigations often amounted to little more than following the Air Force hard line that UFOs did not exist, and that anyone seeing or reporting them was little more than a crackpot to be discredited. Many project investigators like Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who were initially skeptical of the UFO phenomena, later expressed frustration at the Air Force's willing denial in the face of extraordinary evidence. In January of 1970, the United States Air Force closed Project Blue Book and did its best to bury the evidence and the truth. After decades of public denials, the Freedom of Information Act finally opened the project files and allows us to peer deep into the details of how the U.S. government responded to a phenomenon they were desperately unprepared for. After painstaking research and reconstruction of the accounts found within the archives, PNT is pleased to bring you another chapter in Hidden UFO History. Mr. Hiram William Griffin of 602 North Tennessee Avenue is walking east along Highway 92 in the July afternoon. The weather is clear, and a few scattered clouds offer momentary respite from the hot sun, and he pauses for a moment when his attention is attracted skyward by a sudden swishing noise that seems to sing with a shrill tone. Turning his head in the direction of the noise, Griffin spies 5 shiny objects hovering a mile from him at roughly 5,000 feet. Griffin, a former second-class seaman in the U.S. Navy, observes the glittering objects, noting their odd plastic appearance and unusual turtle-backed shape. He observes 3 dark areas on the top of each craft, 2 in the rear and 1 in the center. Not seeing any wings or other control surfaces, he assumes they are some of the new jet jobs that he has heard about. A stunned Griffin watches as the hovering objects move rapidly upwards in formation and off to the northeast, before finally disappearing from view. Amazed at what he had seen, Griffin returned home and built a model of what he had witnessed. 3 days later, Griffin voluntarily reported his sighting at the A2 office of MacDill Airfield, and offered his model as exhibit of the craft. While there is no written transcript of the interview, the details of the official documents are telling of the government's response and go into some detail on Griffin's parentage, military service, criminal status, and employment. Apparently, reporting a UFO sighting to the authorities was reason enough for the authorities to then violate your privacy and investigate the details of your life. Griffin, as it turns out, was born in Tampa, Florida, on October 10, 1923, to parents who were American-born citizens. He served overseas on a troop transport and was discharged from the Navy on March 28, 1944. A search of his police file at the Lakeland Police Department only found 2 incidents of being AWOL from his previous Navy posting and no other criminal offenses. Griffin, like many who had suffered through the long years of the Depression, made his living with odd jobs. After leaving the service, he had found employment as a cab driver, ice cream peddler, amateur artist, and most recently as a sign and house painter. But even with these details, the government wasn't done investigating just yet. In what was common practice, agents interviewed the neighbors and customers of the witness, The questions were loaded. What do you think of your neighbor? Have you ever seen them do anything suspicious? Do they belong to any subversive organizations? What neighbor wouldn't be tempted under these circumstances to perhaps settle a few grudges? So they, perhaps from that spite, or more likely in an attempt to impress the imposing G-men, were only too happy to describe Griffin as an excitable person, very talkative, possessing an exaggerated imagination, and inclined to impress people with his continuous verbal chatter. They had to grudgingly admit, however, that Griffin was not a commie or subversive that they knew of, and his customers all seemed satisfied with the quality of his work. It seemed that the Air Force was more interested in discrediting the witness than investigating the event that he reported, and consequently dismissed the case as being psychologically based. Dissatisfied with the obviously biased Air Force investigation, Dr. J. Allen Hynek took them to task for their smear explanation, stating that simply because the witness was excited about his observations and had the ability to build a model of what he had seen did not disqualify him as a witness. As is often the case with these reports, little is mentioned of the official response. Pages are often missing or simply were never recorded. When they do exist, they shed little light on the actual events or a cause for it. This case is no different. There appears to be no astronomical explanation for this incident. Upward trajectory and plastic appearance, if accurately reported, do not lend themselves to such an explanation. No trail is mentioned. Whether or not Mr. Griffin ever received an official response from the Air Force or Project Blue Book, or his model back, is unknown. What is uncanny, however, is that the Air Force would go to such lengths to attempt to discredit his account. A trained military observer, Griffin was better able than most to interpret what he was seeing, recording it in his memory in enough detail that he was able later to construct a 3D representation, a model that looks stunningly like early stealth technology. How is it possible that Griffin witnessed jet propulsion and stealth technology in an era dominated by gasoline-powered prop planes? Had he witnessed a secret U.S. government project, or was this another in the vanguard of visitations that had begun in Portland on the July 4th weekend? Was this sighting part of the fleet of UFOs that buzzed Muroc Airfield in California the very next day, holding the base spellbound and helpless for nearly an hour against the technologically advanced visitors? While the facts that emerge from the documents thus far paint a clear picture of a technologically primitive and unprepared humanity faced with intelligently controlled, advanced technologies light years beyond our own, the question remains: who or what came to visit the human race in the summer of 1947? We'll keep looking for that answer and the rest of the story in the next episode of Hidden UFO History. I'm your host, reminding you to keep an open mind, because a closed one shuts out the truth.